Hey YouTube, if you're watching this and it is not 2:50 in the afternoon on the 22nd of August, then you are not watching the live show. If you're watching, if you do see, if it is that time, then you're live and stick around. If you're not live, then don't watch this. Watch this one. This is the edited one that you want to see. If nothing happens when I point there, it's because it's not up yet. So I guess you can go ahead and watch this one. But you know, the right one will be there soon. All right, we'll see in a little bit. Hey everybody, we're still 2 minutes into the countdown time. I'll let this run up for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to take it off because I got to plug something else out and plug that in and all that good stuff. Ryan, why don't you get that audio thing rolling in there? This is going to be a doozy of a show. Yeah, I think I've got it all figured out, though. I hope so. If not, then you're the only ones who will ever see this, and I'll just bin the whole thing. A day waste. No, it's going to be good. There's going to be lots of good information in here. I do hope. So let's see who else here today who's tuned in live. It's funny. I got many of the same people that are here during the regular live show, which is awesome. Thank you guys here. And I saw someone from the UK Construction Podcast decided to stay up late. And what is it? 11 p.m. there right now? Is that right? 11 o'clock? It's like 8 a.m. in Australia, which is great. So perhaps we'll get some audience from there that doesn't usually get to make it in. So we'll see what's going on. Hello, Jake and Trevor and Car Galaxy Construction Podcast. You guys are all here. Just the usual suspects in here, which is awesome. Chemcore, hello, Midnight there. Chemcooker, where are you in Midnight? That must be somewhere in middle Europe, I'm assuming. Probably reasonably correctly. Let's see here. Yeah, we're talking about doing the later start. It gave me a lot more time to get ready for this show, which is great. And then discovered or realized the other day that it'd be smart to do these on Mondays because Mondays is always the kind of panic day. So, oh, I got a hello from Scotland. Excellent. Some more people from the UK and the Scottish Isles plugging in. Scottish Isles? That's not right. British Isles, Scotland. I just don't even. That's why this part's not recorded. Actually, it is, but nobody will ever see it. Okay, Scotland's beautiful. It is, by the way. Okay, all right, I'm going to unplug this because I'm going to need that for something else. So let's get rid of that now. Now I got to plug in a different one. I figured out, I thought I was going to have to swap cables throughout the show, and then I realized something quite clever, which I will explain once we actually get this thing started. Boom, Mr. Sean Mark Nipper. Excellent. Look what Sean gave me. Where did it go? Mr. Sean Mark, see, any of you guys ever want to borrow gear? I got it. Any of you guys ever want to borrow gear? All you got to do is come by and bring a gift. Look what Sean brought me. Isn't he a good guy? I was going to break this open, but then I thought I had a show to do. It's going to be a complicated show. But thank you, Mr. Nipper. You are a good man. I am very much looking forward to this. My wife and I are going to start a diet soon, and she said we have to eat and drink everything in the house before we can start the diet. And then Sean brought this along, so sweet. Thanks for buying me some more time. All right, cool. I think it's time to do this. Burns, did you have that much trouble with your gear? Yeah. Okay, good. Let's have a show, shall we? Get that all set in place. I'm probably going to need this at some point. Yeah. What are we learning about today? I have no idea. Pedestal, highlight and shadows. Yeah, that's right. All right. Get this all set up, ready to go. Let's do it. On today's show, we're going to be learning all about the master pedestal setting and the highlight and shadow settings on your camera. Good morning and welcome to PhotoJoseph. Good morning. It's not even morning. It's actually afternoon. I'm so used to that. Good afternoon and welcome to PhotoJoseph's Photo Moment, the first live 3 times a week show here at youtube.com/PhotoJoseph, traditionally 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, but this marks the first of what will be a new, it's not a new, what do you call it? A new schedule, new part of the schedule. Every once in a while, I've bumped them to every 3 weeks for now. We're going to do a show later in the day at 3 p.m. And today's Wednesday. We're doing it at 3. Next time, we're going to do it on a Monday because that seems to make more sense, give our Monday morning a little bit more breathing room. And so every 3 weeks or so, and we'll see, this might change, but we're going to do one later in the afternoon so that hopefully we can catch more of the live audience from all over the world, which is cool, which is exciting. I'm hoping to bring in some new folks who don't normally get to watch this live. If you are watching the show live for the first time today, be sure to say hi in the comments. Put @PhotoJoseph in front of it. When you do that, it comes up on the screen like this. If you've never gotten to participate before, we see who is here. When you put @PhotoJoseph, it shows up nice and red on my screen, and I know you've got a question. Speaking of questions, this is going to be a complex show. So first of all, everybody cross your fingers and your toes that this goes off without a hitch. Second of all, if you have questions throughout the show on the topic or on any other topic, but as much as you can on topic, drop them into the live chat at any point you like. Make sure you put @PhotoJoseph in front of it, and at the end of the show, we'll come back around and go through all the questions that are in there. So, what is today's show all about? It is about 3 things, actually 2, but kind of 3. So we're going to be talking about master pedestal and the highlight and shadow settings primarily. Now, we can't really address those without also going into the luminance settings on the camera, so we're going to talk about that just to make sure that you have it set correctly, because if you don't, then this doesn't work. So we're going to touch on that a little bit, explain that a little bit, and then get back into master pedestal and highlight and shadow settings. So What are these? First, I'm going to explain some of this, and then we're going to obviously take a look at it and see how this all comes together in the real world. Master Pedestal is your black point. That is the blackest blacks of your camera. You can raise that or lower that. It's also called raising or lowering the floor. And if you raise or lower the floor, your darkest darks get either darker or lighter. Now, the only real reason you should be adjusting this is to match cameras from different manufacturers on set. So if you are doing a live production, usually a live production, because if it's post, that if it's not live, then you can always fix it in post, right? But if you're doing a live production and you have multiple cameras from multiple manufacturers, as I do in this production here, you can adjust the black level so that black level matches across all of your cameras. That is pretty much the only place you really need to pay attention to it. It is not a way to get more dynamic range into your shot. Now, this is something that when I was doing research for today's show, I ran into this a lot of discussions online. I've talked to my friends at Panasonic about this just to triple confirm it. There are individuals who believe that if you raise the Master Pedestal, which is going to make your darkest darks brighter, it's going to make them more gray instead of black, that you are introducing extra dynamic range and you're capturing extra dynamic range because look, I can see more data in the shadows than I could before. You're not. It's actually quite the opposite of that. You are basically, all you're doing is lifting those shadows, and if you had data from here to here, you have just pushed this data up, squished the data into place, and thrown away all the capacity of the sensor to capture this part down here. So don't do it as a way to capture extra dynamic range. That's not how it's going to work. Now, in filming, some DPs may decide to raise the floor for a shot, just to kind of raise the levels on that a little bit to get a little bit brighter because they want their shadows to be a little bit brighter. And then it's a creative decision, and that's fine, but it is not going to get you extra dynamic range. So if you read that, it is false. It is not what it's doing. It's quite the opposite. So don't do it. So for the most part, most of you never need to adjust the Master Pedestal level. So when you see it, you can safely ignore it almost always. And we're going to see a possible exception in here. Highlights and shadows are next. Highlights and shadows are represented in the camera as curves, and we are, of course, going to be looking at this. And this is no different than the curves that you see in Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One Pro, whatever you're using. And with the idea behind a curve is you have a 2-point curve in the case of the camera, and you can take your dark shadows and you can make them a little bit darker, a little bit brighter. You can take your highlights and make them a little bit brighter, a little bit darker. And the whole point here is that you are raising and lowering the brightness values of the darker ranges, not the darkest range, that would be your Master Pedestal, but the darker ranges, everything kind of below 50%, and the brighter ranges, everything above 50%. And just taking that, making it a little bit brighter, a little bit darker. Ideally, and it does to the degree that you don't really push things, ideally, what the expectation is that when you're adjusting the highlight and shadows, your floor, your black point doesn't change, your middle gray point doesn't change, and your brightest highlights don't change. They are all kind of locked in, and the curves are adjusting everything in between. So that's how the curves work, the highlight and shadow work. The last part of this is our luminance settings, and this is where we're actually going to start the live demo today. So when you look at the luminance level in your camera, you're going to see a variety of numbers in there, and you might be tempted to expand on them, and we're going to show you exactly why you don't. So that's what we're going to be looking at. First, we're going to explain how the luminance levels work and why you probably don't want to change them, and we'll see the effect that it has in camera. So let me show you everything that we've got set up here so you can better follow along what we're actually doing. All right, first up we have a GH5. The GH5 is obviously where I'm going to be doing all the controls on here. Now, incidentally, I should point out that many of the settings that we're looking at today, the Master Pedestal setting is only available in the GH series, and actually, it's not, I didn't look in the G9. I didn't even look, but it's the GH series cameras. This is a pro video level thing. Highlights and shadows is on all of your Lumix cameras. I would suspect that you're going to find a similar thing on pretty much every camera out there, the highlights and shadow things, because it's not a terribly unique thing. Master Pedestal, something you're probably only going to find on pro level video cameras. And then the luminance values that you can change, you will find probably only on the GH series or higher end video cameras as well. The lessons that I'm teaching today, incidentally, are not exclusive to Lumix. I am using it on Lumix, obviously. They might be called different things on your cameras, but it is something you're only going to find on higher-end cameras that are meant to do video production work, because most of this doesn't really have anything to do with stills. Highlights and shadows, you can definitely adjust for stills, but we're looking at it from the video perspective. And like I said, highlights and shadows show up on every camera. So, all right, so we've got our GH5. We also have back here a X-Rite Colorchecker video. It's the big Colorchecker video. The camera is obviously pointing at the Colorchecker. I have a feed for you looking through the Colorchecker, or through the GH5. So that's the GH5 looking at the Colorchecker. We are going to be, throughout the course of today's presentation, where I'm going to be turning on and off, and I'm working on turning it on right now, the menu command so that you can see what this camera is showing. What we also have is another view that is a close-up of an Atomos Ninja. Now, this is the Ninja Assassin, the older Ninja. The signal from the GH5, let me just hide this for a moment here. The signal from the GH5 is being fed into the Ninja, and you can see the menu display on here. So in fact, I'm going to right now turn that back off again. So what you're going to see on here is a clean view of what the GH5 is seeing. This is so that I can bring this up nice and big, and you can look at the RGB parade. So this is what you're going to be looking at, and I'm going to, now that you've seen that, incidentally, let me zoom back out, just in case you're curious, GH5 is coming into here, and then out of here is being fed back into that view, which is exactly what the camera sees. So we'll go back to this. Now that you know what you're looking at there, I'm going to go ahead and zoom into that. So we're just looking at the parade because you don't need to see all the rest of it, and that is where we'll leave it for the duration of the show. Okay, so that is our basic setup. We've got our camera, we've got the Colorchecker passport, and we've got the RGB parade showing up on the Atomos. Okay, now, let's see here. That's that, and that. Explain the loop. Okay, now we get into what this card actually is that we're looking at. Let's go back to this view here. This card that we're looking at from X-Rite has 4 gray levels, and this is what we're going to be focusing on today. It's very important to know what these levels are supposed to be. The whole purpose of this is to adjust these levels so that when we're looking at it over here, we get them to line up in the right spots on this chart. That's the whole purpose of this. That is why we're doing this. And so what are these levels? Well, this is meant to be zero IRE, pure black. It is a shiny black, which is kind of, if I tilt this and it picks up a reflection, you see how it's glary. So it's a very kind of tricky to light this and to get it exactly right so you get pure black, but that is the idea. The idea there is that it's pure black. This is 20 IRE. This is 40 IRE. And 40 IRE, by the way, is 50% gray. That is middle gray. And then this is 90. 90 being just below pure white being 100. So you have 0, 20, 40, and 90. Surprisingly, that information, it's like, you know, the scene in Star Wars where many Bothams or something died to bring you this information. That's kind of what it takes to get this information. This is not on the X-Rite website. I emailed them asking what they were, and instead of telling me what they were, they gave me these spreadsheets and charts and like massive amounts of data. And we went back and forth, and finally they had said, well, that's what it is. And then I found other YouTube videos, people talking about it the same way, and so we concluded, all right, you know what, that's what we're going with. That said, here's something that I want to point out that I think is really important about setting up a color card like this or gray card like this. Yes, those values are supposed to be 0, 20, 40, 90. If you're looking at it on the scopes and you don't have it exactly 0, 20, 40, 90, that's okay. What matters is when you have multiple cameras and you're trying to make a match is that they're the same and that you're getting a look that you like. You're going to see as we go through different picture profiles on here that those gray levels shift dramatically depending on the profile that you're using. And that's by design, right? Do you want a profile that's a little bit more crunchy, higher contrast? You want it to be a bit flatter? Those different profiles are changing where those fall on the IRE scale. And that's perfectly fine. But what we're doing here today is we're going to use this to get it to a kind of native position, which is, again, what you would do if you were matching this among multiple cameras. So those numbers are important. Those numbers also show up over here on the chart. So at the bottom of the line, that's 0. And then you can kind of see on there, where is it? There we go. You can see there it says 20, and then that's 40. And then there's going to be 90 between here. There's no line at 90, unfortunately. But those are the scales. Those are the lines that we're looking at. So that is the setup of what we've got. All right, cool. I'm looking at my notes here to make sure I'm not missing anything. Done. Okay, so that's that part of it. So now let's get into the actual. Oh no, we got to get into the Luma part. Goodness, I almost skipped that whole thing on here. Where's my notes on that? Anyway, so we're going to look at the Luma part on this first, the luminance value. So let me go back into the camera here and make sure that the menu settings are going out. And we will do this. Let me set this on, turn these menus on here. Switch to this camera view, haha, hello. And so now you can see what I'm doing in the camera. If I look in the camera to we are on the, what are these called, the motion picture menu. And if I scroll through here, we are going to find, where is Master Pedestal? No, sorry, luminance level, that's what we're doing first. It's on page 2 of 4. Where are we? We're at luminance level right at the top. So this is the setting that you're going to see. You have 3 options in here. 0 to 255, 16 to 235, and 16 to 255. 0 to 255 is essentially pure black to pure white. It's actually in the space of video, in the world of video, it is super black to super white. The default on the camera is 16 to 235. 16 to 235 translates to, at 16, it's 7.5 IRE, and at 235, that is 100 IRE. That is the darkest dark and the brightest bright that you want for broadcast, keeping in mind that broadcast is where your film's going to go, whether it's going on TV or even on YouTube, basically follow these same levels. This is what you want. So you want to stay within that range, which is why the camera is set by default to 16 to 235. If you set it to 0 to 255, you will actually be capturing more dynamic range in your shot. So if you want to capture more dynamic range, this is how you can do it. However, if you don't grade it, if you just take that and stick it up on YouTube or put it on broadcast, it's going to clip your shadows and highlights because it's out of range of what the platform can handle. So you need to be within that 16 to 235 range, which is why for the most part, you're going to leave it in 16 to 235. If, however, you do want to capture more range and you do want to then have to grade it and pull things in later, then by all means, go to 0 to 255, but be aware of it. Then there's the 16 to 255, which is basically protecting your shadows but not your highlights. I really can't imagine why you'd want to use that, but it's there if you wanted to. Now, just to really kind of drive the point home about the dynamic range, you've heard of vlog before, we've talked about it on the show before. The idea behind log is that you are capturing more dynamic range in log. And so you think, well, hold on a second, if I'm in log, which one of these settings would it be at? Well, watch, this is quite interesting. So if I pull up the main menu on here, the photo style menu, you'll notice that I'm in a natural photo style right now. And you saw that I could choose between 0 to 255 and 16 to 235. I'm going to switch this over to log and bring up the menu again. And you notice now that luminance level menu is not available. It is locked in, and you can see it once this goes away. There we go. You can see that it is locked in at 0 to 255. So when you're shooting log, you are shooting the full range. This is part of why you get more dynamic range when you're shooting log. So when you're in log, you're locked into 0 to 255. When you're in any standard profile, you have a choice. Only go to 0 to 255 if you know that you're going to grade it and you basically know what you're doing. Keeping in mind, too, that if you underexpose a little bit and you're shooting 0 to 255, anything below 0 is gone forever. It's gone. Unlike if you're shooting 16 to 235, you got some leeway, right? If you underexpose, overexpose a little bit, you got some room to pull things in because there's a little bit more data in the sensor. If you overexpose when you're 0 to 255, is gone. So just be aware of it. Just things that you want to know. Last thing I want to show you on here is what happens when we switch this while looking at the chart on here. So let me go back in first of all and get out of log. We're going to go back into the natural mode. I'm using natural for this demonstration because natural is the most common, if you will. It's kind of the most neutral, I should say. It's the most neutral profile. Okay, so I've gone in there. It is still set to 16 to 235. Okay, I'm going to now turn off the menus on here for a moment so that we're getting a clean output to the Atomos. And I'm going to show you the Atomos. And we're not going to worry about making this accurate right now. I'm just going to adjust the levels so that everything's within range. So you can see that your darkest shadows are above 0, the brightest highlights are below 100, so everything's within range in here. And again, we're at 16 to 235. Now you can't see me do this, but I'm going to go into the menu here, and I'm going to set this to 0 to 255, and as soon as I do that, look what happens. See how it's expanded beyond the range? We are out of range. We are in super black and super white mode. We are beyond what can be broadcast. If we were broadcasting live while set right there, that data would be gone. So, and in fact, this is actually really interesting because you are seeing a live broadcast right now, so you should be seeing, if we go to there, you should be seeing blacks that are below black and whites that are above white because we have expanded beyond the range. So that is what that is. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to go back to 16 to 235 because that is the range that we want to be in. Okay, so that's that part of this. Now we've got now that we've got that part of it kind of out of the way, we know that we need to be in 16 to 235. Now we can go back to what we really want to talk about, which is Master Pedestal and the highlights and shadows. So let us go, and did I turn the menus back on? Let me turn the menus back on here so that you can once again see what's coming out of this. And we'll go back into this view here. And I'm going to go to my Master Pedestal. So actually I probably should, well, that's all right, it's on now. Let's see here, Master Pedestal. Where was that? Creative video menu, 1 of 2, so that's up here. There we go, Master Pedestal. So this is what I'm going to be changing on here. This 0, it can go all the way up to plus 15 or minus 15. Yeah, you can see that there. Okay, so let's take a look. I mean, now that I've turned this view back on, I actually realize I need to turn this off. So let me turn this off so you don't see the data coming out on screen, and I'm going to show you this screen here. So now I'm going to go back in, and again, you can't see me doing it, but you're going to see the effects of it. I'm going to go back into my Master Pedestal settings, and it's at 0 right now, and I'm going to start adjusting it down or up. Now notice there is going to be some level of the grays changing just because of the nature of stretching it out this far. But essentially what we're looking at is just the floor being moved. Now the rest of these the rest of the levels here are not accurate right now. They're not set in where they should be, and that's fine. That's by design. This is being set up this way so that you can just see how that floor goes up and down. So this is where, once you've got the rest of it dialed in, and we're going to kind of do this all together, where you would go in and adjust that floor so that your camera's matched. That's the whole point of that. So that's all it's adjusting is the floor. Yes, it pulls the mid-ranges a little bit with it, but it really is about adjusting the floor. So that's it. That's all there is to that. So let me put that back to 0 for now. The next one is the one that's more fun to look at. So let's go back to this view here. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do it like this. Let's go to this view so you see the whole camera. And let me bring the menus back on here. And now we're going to look at the highlights and shadows. So here, if we go to highlights and shadows, there it is. This is the highlights and shadows interface. So while I adjust this is a nice way to see it because you can see the highlight and shadow menu very, very small. When you're looking at it on the screen itself, you can kind of see on here, it takes up the majority of the screen, but because we're sending it out over the HDMI output, you're seeing a nice small menu with the big card behind it. So as I adjust this, you're going to very easily, very clearly see what's happening on the X-Rite card itself. So go back into this, and I adjust this by, well, first of all, I have presets. You see down on the bottom, I can choose these different curve presets on here. So we've got here, it's darkening the shadows and brightening the highlights. This is going the reverse. It's raising the shadows and lowering the highlights. But if we just start at any regular point here, you'll notice on this particular camera, this is the way it works in the Lumix cameras. Again, on yours it may be a little different. But you see in the middle where it says shadow, plus and minus 0, highlight, plus and minus 0, and it's showing me which knobs to use. So I can use the controls on the camera, the physical dials, to adjust that. So there I've raised the shadows 5 points, lowered the shadows 5 points. Here I can raise the highlights 5 points and lower them 5 points. And you can see visually what's happening. So if you like, forget about the scopes for a second. If you just like to have crunchy shadows and bright highlights, that's how you would set it up. So this is going to give you that kind of that higher contrast range. This is something very commonly called an S-curve. If you look back at this, you see it's in the shape of an S. Well, that's hence the S-curve name. We've created that S-curve in there, and we have that nice little contrast, added contrast in there. We've totally messed up setting these scopes to 40 and 20. That's not the point here. We're just in here making a look. So that's the point of that. Right, so that's how that's adjusted. So we can adjust the Master Pedestal to change the blacks, and we can adjust these to adjust the mids and highs. Now, what is actually being changed? Well, for this, we're going to take a look at the scopes here. And I am going to, let's go back to a default position here. I'm going to change the shadows. And again, what you're looking at right here, and actually, I need to do as well, is turn off the display so that you're seeing a nice clean output here. Turn that off again, there we go. So what you are going to see in the highlights and shadows adjustments, let me pull this back up again, is let me back up. Watch these lines on here. So there's my black, there's my 20s, target at 20, there's my target 40, target 90. They're not set in the right place right now, that's fine. As I adjust it, watch which ones of these lines move. So I'm going to adjust my shadows, and you see how, yes, the black point is moving as well, because it kind of has to some degree, but really what we're looking at is that lower, darker shadow, that 20. And then when I adjust the highlights, it's the 90 that moves. Now, we are getting a little bit of pull off of the 40 as well, and part of that is because we're so kind of stretched out and overexposed here, but we are adjusting primarily the highlights on there. So with that in mind, look at it this way. We have control over the black point with our Master Pedestal, over the 20 IRE point with our shadows, over the 90 IRE point with our highlight, meaning that the middle point, the 40, the middle gray, we don't have control over using any of these controls except for exposure. So the way that we want to approach this is to set the exposure using ISO, shutter speed, aperture, shutter angle, and aperture, whatever combination you want. Use those to get that middle gray locked into place first, and then use the other tools to adjust the rest of them, the 20, the 0, and the 90, to get them into place. And that's where we conclude with this. That's our final step. So we've looked at how to adjust all these different parts in here. Now we know what to adjust. So we're going to start by getting our exposure so that the middle point is accurate, and then we will adjust the highlights, the shadows, and if necessary, the Master Pedestal, but it probably won't be. Now, but before we can do any of that, for those of you who've looked at this sort of thing before, you might have noticed when looking at this close-ups of the scopes here that take a look at the 40 line right here. Other than the fact, or I guess it's 60 now, but look at those lines right there. Other than the fact that they're not in the right position, what else is wrong with them? the R, G, and B, the red, green, and blue, don't line up. What does that tell me? It tells me that my white balance is off. So before you go around messing with this, it's probably going to be important to get your white balance right. If your white balance isn't accurate, then those lines are not going to be lined up. You're going to have more blue or less red or whatever, something else wrong with the image, keeping it from being true neutral. So that's actually, before we do anything else, going to be our first step, is to set the white balance. And just to kind of really show this, well, I'm going to do it like this. I've got my other side of this checker card here has a white balance tool, and this is a spectrally neutral white balance tool. It's quite cool. If you read about this thing on the X-Rite website, it talks about how the materials that are made with it, the color of it is designed to reflect every spectrum of light, or virtually every spectrum of light, back to you, giving you the most even white balance. Pretty cool, right? And for those of you who are wondering about white balance versus should you use a white card or a gray card to do it, the fact that this card is not pure white, it is a neutral gray, gives you that answer. You want to be white balancing with something that is neutral gray, not pure white. I actually did a show on that a while ago. I'll link to that up here. It's kind of an interesting topic to discuss, but out of the realm of this show. Anyway, so that's set. So now let me go back and set my colors to neutral here again. And we are going to position this back in so it fills the screen here. Close enough. We are going to look through this screen again. I need to turn the menus back on so you can see what's happening. So let me do that. I wish there was an easy way to toggle this on and off without going to the menu, but there isn't. Okay, so now we're looking through here. Exposure's way up. Let me pull this down a little bit. White balance. This is where we're going to adjust the white balance. So I'm going to go into my white balance setting, and I'm going to start by taking a Kelvin adjustment here and just adjusting this up and down. And you can see the colors changing there on the output, right? But now take a look at the same thing on here. And now look at how these are changing. So from here, what I could do is manually go in and adjust these until they're perfectly accurate, perfectly lined up. That would be one way to do it. Or what I could do is simply go into a custom white balance set, and we'll just go like number 3 here, say select white set, hit OK, and it sets it. Now let me redo that for those of you who are looking at the wrong screen. I'm going to go back into the white balance setting here. I choose a preset. Well, this time we'll use preset 1. I go white balance set. I hit set, and it resets it back to neutral. And now if we go back to the close-up in here, we'll see that those are neutral. Now, if for whatever reason they still weren't quite right, or if you just felt like you wanted to adjust this a little bit more manually, you can do that. You can go in and adjust the color, and really you could adjust the color on here, and I'll show you this, and watch there. And I can't show you both simultaneously, but watch how this works. So I could go into here, go back into my white balance setting, and if I go with the down arrow, it goes into adjust, and now I can go in and I can adjust for very fine levels of adjustment in here, right? So I can change that. And if we go back to the looking at the RGB parade, I could go in here and I could very subtly make adjustments here. So if I really wanted to kind of dial something in, if it for whatever reason wasn't exactly right, I could go in here and just tweak a little bit to get it just right. But I'm going to put it at its default setting. I'm actually going to do a new calibration one more time, white set. There it's set, and we are nice and neutral. So that is our first step to get that neutral white. Now we can go back to setting the exposure. So let me flip this thing back into position here. And again, I got to make sure that I'm not getting any reflections on that. I think that looks, looks good enough there. Zoom in a little bit. You don't have to, by the way, you don't have to zoom in like I am here. You can do it way out like that. That's fine. You'll still see the data that you need on the parade, but it's just easier for this if I just kind of zoom in all the way. You can like really clearly see what's happening. All right, so that's in place. Now we're going to switch back over to this view, and we're going to adjust the exposure. So I'm going to just very quickly make sure that everything is set up right. So I'm going to turn off my external display so it's not confusing the parade. And I'm going to, my white balance is already set, I know that. And I'm going to double check that my, I suppose you could watch this view while I do this. Let's go to this view, there we go. My master pedestal is at 0. And I'm going to make sure that my highlights and shadows are neutral or flat as well, and they are. Okay, and I know you can't see that because I've turned that off so that what you're seeing on the RGB parade is clean. I know, there's a lot of stuff going on. Okay, so now let's go take a look at the RGB, and I'm going to adjust exposure. I'm going to do this just by adjusting ISO. This is actually really, really dark on here right now. Is one of the challenges I had setting up for this show. I couldn't find a way to light this without me casting shadows on it, and I had a hard time lighting me without shining light onto the lens. It was a whole, this is half of what I've been doing today, getting this set up. So we're dealing with the fact that it's dark. It doesn't matter, I'm gonna crank the ISO. It's irrelevant to what we're doing today. The end result is the same. So back to this view. I'm now going to stop shaking the table. I am then going to adjust my ISO until my middle point there is, where do I want it? I want it at 40, right? So that is too bright. Let's bring this down to about 40. So that is at 40. It's close. It's not perfectly on 40. And we can see, yeah, well, if I go there, that's too high. That's a little bit low. At this point, if I was doing this, I want to be super accurate about it. I would probably control that last little bit of light control with an ND filter. Because when you're adjusting your aperture, unless you have a stepless aperture, if you got a stepless aperture, then you can exactly position it. But if you got your aperture the way you want it, your shutter angle's at 180, maybe you're fixed at a specific ISO you want to be shooting at, and you can't get that exact range, that's where variable ND comes in handy, and you can adjust the exact amount of light coming in. So that's how that would work. Anyway, we're going to leave it like so. We're going to call that even on the 40 in there, and after we play with other things, we may end up getting it balanced out in the end anyway. We can very clearly see that our whites are not bright enough, and our mids are too dark. So let's start adjusting. So I'm going to go into the camera, and again, you can't see this part of it, but I'm going to go into the camera, and I'm going to start raising the shadows. And 1 or 2 clicks on the shadows brings those up. And then I'm going to raise the highlights. We need that up to about, say right about there, somewhere around there. We don't want to go too bright. We want to be careful. Do want to be careful. But that's looking pretty good. And my black looks like it's getting some reflections. You can see as I'm moving around, you can see the little bit of me getting picked up on the reflections. But the darkest part of that is what I'm really focused on, and that is just above 0, which is right about where I want it. And that is what that looks like. And that is technically very, very accurate at this point. That's it. That's all you got to do. Now, if the black point wasn't right, I could adjust the black pedestal, but I don't need to. You saw where it was on there. If we look at that, you'll see it's just above the black, which is where I want it to be. If it was at 0 or crushed at 0, then I would definitely be crushing detail in the blacks. Do not want to do that. So it's just above black, which is where I want it to be. And at this point, I'm looking at that going, that looks pretty darn good. Looks pretty clean. Now I did that. Let's see, if we look at these settings on the camera now, it is, my highlights are actually raised quite high, +5. My shadows are raised quite high as well, +2. That's a lot, right? That's a lot of change to get it technically accurate. Well, in broadcast, we have a color space called Rec 709 that is the most, that's your standard broadcast color space. The GH5 can be set into a 709 profile. It's called like 709 because it's like 709. So let me do that. Let me go into the highlights and shadows and reset them. And I'm going to turn the menu back on so you can see what's happening here. And then let's go into the camera. Actually, we'll do it this way. There we go. Go into the camera here, and I'm going to set my color profile. So there it's at natural right now. I'm going to go past log to 709. So that's 709L, like 709. And we select that, and we go back to this view and raise the exposure just a hair. And you see without any adjustments, without any highlight and shadow adjustments, we are essentially spot on. I'd say it's somewhere between those two, isn't it? So there again, you need that ND or a stepless aperture to really get it right. But that Rec 709 is giving you that standard neutral broadcast profile. So if you want to shoot as flat and standard as you can without getting into log or Cine D or any of that, you can shoot in 709, and then you're going to get that more neutral, more accurate, I suppose, profile. If your camera doesn't do that by adjusting the highlights and shadows as I've done in here, you can get it into that space manually. So that is all there is to it, I think. Yeah. Oh, that was it. That's everything I want to show you. It actually worked. Ooh, guys, if you feel like you learned something today, let me remind you about how this show works. We do this on something we call a value for value proposition. If you feel like you've taken value from today's show, and I'd like to think that today's show, if you've gotten this far, has provided some value for you, then consider putting value back. Head over to PhotoJoseph.com/support, and you'll see all the different ways that you can do that there. And let me tell you, it's not on that card yet, but let me tell you the best way that you can do that, the way you can help out the show the most, is to become a member at PhotoJoseph.com. When you're a member at PhotoJoseph.com, that allows you access to all of the live training we've ever done, which goes back years and years and years. Unlimited, kind of a Netflix model. You pay a monthly or an annual fee, and you get all the live streaming, all the streaming you want, the replays rather. The live streaming is always free, by the way. You get all the replays that you want of the software live training and of the new series that we've just kicked off called Business of the Business. And this is interviews with content creators, photographers, filmmakers, YouTubers, people whose job it is to create content. It's interviews with them about the business side of their business, how they run their business, everything from sales and marketing to taxes, finances, all that kind of stuff, it's all being covered in that course. We've got one interview under the belt, which we just did a couple weeks ago with Caleb Pike of the DSLR Video Shooter channel here on YouTube. And I've got a bunch more people lined up over the coming months, so it's going to be a really fun thing to watch. And those, again, you get to watch them live for free if you can catch them live. But if you want to watch them afterwards, over to PhotoJoseph.com. And you can learn all about all that at PhotoJoseph.com/support. So I hope, my friends, that was interesting to you. Now, that was a lot. Let's jump into the Q&A. I saw a bunch of stuff going by on the Q&A, on the questions, on the chit chat here. And so if you haven't gotten your chat question in there, get it in there now, because it is time for the Q&A. Greetings and welcome back. Good afternoon again. PhotoJoseph Photo Moment, the special afternoon edition for the wider spread international audience. And we are here today to talk about all this fun stuff with the Master Pedestal and highlight and shadows. And I'll bet you didn't think this was going to be fun, but it was, wasn't it? Wasn't that cool? Isn't that exciting? All right, we are in the Q&A portion, so it's time to jump into the Qs and hopefully we can A them and see where we are. So I'm scrolling down through them right now, and eventually we're going to find the beginning of the actual show. And look, someone said, what a better way to end the day than watching my show. Why, thank you very much, Construction Podcast. That is very kind of you to say. Alrighty, so Trevor Panucki says, I used Master Pedestal a lot more before I got the Tiffin Pro Mist Black. I have not used that filter. I've heard great things about it, though. It's a filter, go in the front of your camera, obviously. Kind of raises your blacks a little bit, right? Isn't that what it does? It adds like a little bit of misty, just raises it up, make it a little bit of that foggy, kind of more vintagey look. Isn't that the idea behind that? Have not played with that. Very cool. Let's see here. Esther, oh, what was it? This car says, I thought it was your color profile that did that, i.e. Vlog. So I think we're going back in the show. But yeah, Vlog will give you the most dynamic range and locks you in at 0 to 255. If you have no idea what that means, then you didn't watch the full show. And I don't mean you, I mean you who are watching. SR Digital says, oh, Scotland. Maybe Scotland's the place to go when Joseph comes over to the UK and to see his loyal UK fans next year. I think it's a really good idea. I really think I should do that. All right. Ryan saying I name drop Bothans. Hey, it worked. It worked for the show. Burns Tech, here we go. I wish these cameras would tell you why this menu item can't be changed. I know. And they started doing that in some places on the GH series cameras. Sometimes you hit a menu that you can't and it tells you why. But it's in like maybe 10% of the menus. I know, believe me, that is feedback I have given with vigor. Please, please tell us why we can't choose a menu item. All right, a lot of chit chat going on here, but nothing with my name in front of it. Oh, well, gosh, I guess that means that my day is over. That was easy. You guys have any questions? Come on, get some questions up here. Trevor saying, you know, you have to do a sit down with Frederick, of course. I will. I will bring Frederick on. It's almost too easy to bring him on, so it's like I got to delay that one a little bit. I'm not going to make that one of the first ones, but he'll get on. No question about it. I'd like to know how he makes a living too. It's very confusing to me. Frederick, I love you, buddy. Let's see here. Anything else going on in here that I missed? Let's see if there's anything that didn't have my name in front of it worth addressing. I'd rather have what the camera shoot and then edit my blacks and highlights manually to my liking in post. Well, in that case, car, set your camera to 0 to 255 and just do not clip your highlights and shadows or they will be gone forever. Very, very important. Yeah, I know, talking about why these menu items should tell you why they can't change. Here we go, Construction Podcast. Any plans on a video of your settings for the GH5 on the menu? Plans on a video of your settings? Okay, so in my GH5 training course that I did, which if you haven't seen that before, then gh5training.com, a 5.5-hour complete video training course for the LUMIX GH5, which I know one of these days I'm actually going to do an update for that thing to the latest operating system and to the GH5S. I know, I will. It's busy. In that, I talk about my settings. I actually provide a settings file that you can download. That needs to be updated because I've changed it since then. So that is definitely something that I need to do more of. The thing is, one of the reasons that I'm hesitant to go, oh, look, I've changed my settings to the GH5, these are my new settings and upload them, is I change them a lot. I change them a lot depending on the shoot that I'm doing. Right, like I have my custom settings dialed in for a variety of different things like slow motion shooting or 10-bit and lots of other stuff like that, but I change it often. Even the commands, what my presets are here, I was changing one of them today for the show because I'm always showing different things in the show. So I change it a lot, but I know I should do that again. I should update that. I'll try and do that. SR Digital says, presumably, here we go, presumably when you were trying to get the exposure right and suggested a variable ND filter, the change in the exposure you were trying was over 1/3 of a stop. Correct. And part of the problem too is that remember I said it's super dark in here, so I would have more control over the aperture. I can control the aperture more finitely, but I'm already wide open on this lens, and I was, the ISO is cranked really high, and you don't get as much finite control with the ISO change. And so, yeah, I would need that variable ND. It would have been better if I had more light in here. I could use the aperture, and I could be a little bit more finite about it, but I couldn't. So, but yes, the variable ND will allow you to really, really fine-tune that and get your exposure exactly perfectly right. And keep in mind, for the most part, that's the kind of thing you could easily make that adjustment in post, but if you're like me, you like getting a writing camera, then that's what you do. Kem Kolker says, do you need to white balance each shot? Excellent question. If light changes, you must recalibrate the whole thing again. Okay, so there's two sides of that. If your objective is for every shot to look like it was shot under the same lighting, then yes. So if, for example, you are taking pictures at, or shooting video at a party, I don't know, example, and you've got two different rooms you're in, and one room is one white balance setting and the other is another, and you're gonna be cutting this and intercutting the footage together, you probably don't want the white balance shifting from room to room. You probably want it to be consistent. So yes, you would need two different white balance settings, or if the sun's going down and the light is changing, but you don't want it to look like that, you want it to be consistent throughout the evening, let's say, then yes, you'd have to continuously recalibrate your white balance. However, in most shooting, we don't necessarily want it to be perfect all the way through. We want it to reflect the world around us. So if the sun, if it's getting later in the day, if it's getting towards sunset, getting towards golden hour, the light gets warmer, we want that, right? If you take a picture at true sunlight white balance, which is 5500K up to 6, it kind of depends on where you are in the sky around you, but 5500K is usually a good kind of baseline neutral. In the middle of the day, everything's perfect. But then you get into the sunset hour, and suddenly everything's very orange. Well, that is technically an incorrect white balance, because you're looking at it going, it's orange, it's not white. But you want it to be orange because you want it to look like the sun's going down. That's why you're shooting at golden hour. You want that warmer light. So if you were to take out a white balance card, and calibrate for that sunset, then your sunset's just gone. You've just erased it and you've gone back to a neutral white. So you don't want to change it if you want your shots to reflect the real world environment around you. If you don't want to reflect the real world environment around you, if you want to keep it consistent from shot to shot, then yes, you must recalibrate for every shot, or at least every time the lighting changes. So excellent question, Kem. That's a very, very good question. Thank you for asking that. Car Galaxy, indoor and outdoor, you definitely need different white balance exposures. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, so I guess that's it. Well, not too many questions here. Alrighty. Well, we had a good sized live audience today, so it certainly isn't for lack of people being here. I'm going to guess it's because I just gave so much good information, there's nothing to ask. Hey, thanks again for tuning in, you guys. If you like what you saw here, you know what to do. Head over to PhotoJoseph.com. You can click on the membership button or hit that support page and learn how to help out the show, help out the channel, keep us growing, keeping us strong in here. It allows me to do things like spend the entire day getting ready for a show like I did today, which is a little excessive, but sometimes it's what it takes. All right, everybody. Hey, it is, what day is this? It's Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you back here on Friday for a very short and simple easy show. It's going to be a short one. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.